Good morning, Spence. How are you doing? I am very glad to be talking to you today, and what I wanted to talk to you about was a journey that I've taken over the last few years, where I've been trying to get animals into view. And I don't mean literally trying to look at pictures of animals, although we will do some of that. I actually mean trying to see an animal as an animal, and not the whole mass of human conceptions and presuppositions that we put on top. But before I talk to you about my journey, I wanted to show you something that happened to me last summer when I was doing research in Indonesia. It may seem like nothing, but did you see what just happened? A chicken crossed the road. A chicken literally was at one side of the road and crossed over to the other side. And I was walking along, and then I saw it happen, and I just stopped, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't think that could happen. I thought it was this sort of abstract thought experiment that someone had dreamed up years ago. And that the reason we chose it for the riddle, why did the chicken cross the road, was because it didn't happen, that it could exist in this sort of reasoned space and that it wasn't in true life. It was like saying there's a cat in a box in infinite space. It was on the same scale. But in Indonesia, there are plenty of chickens that cross the road. They're village chickens. They live their life in front of the human eye, from egg to chick to chicken. But I had never actually seen a chicken long enough to see it cross the road, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever seen a chicken at all. This really gave me pause, because in the last 4 years, I've been working on a quartet of novels about great apes and young people's relationships with great apes. And my main work has been to try to see the ape as itself. This is one of the orangutans I spent time with in Borneo last summer. And when you look into an ape's eyes, it's actually very easy to make an empathetic link. Of all the non-human animals, apes make it easiest to sort of take yourself out of your own shoes and enter the animal and try to imagine what its experience is like. All the great apes share between 90 and 98.7% of their DNA with people. So it made my job easy, and it opened up the human, non-human animal divide and made me sort of think more about animals' experiences and puzzle through why it's so tricky for us to get a handle on what an animal is for itself. This was my first experience with the great apes. This is Oshwe, who was one of the youngest orphans at Lola Ya Bonobo, which means bonobo paradise, and it's a sanctuary for orphan bonobos outside of Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Little Oshwe was so little when he arrived that he couldn't eat breakfast with the other bonobos because they would get all the food and he would be toddling over and it would all be gone by the time he got there. So my job while I was there was to have breakfast with him. And he was very particular about how he would eat. He liked mangoes and bananas. That cliche about an ape holding a banana is totally true. But he really liked peanuts, and he had a very specific way of eating peanuts. And it took a long time because he had to unwrap each one individually and take off that bitter red paper that's around the nut. So he was very much him. None of the other bonobos did that. This was his personality. And it made me realize right off the bat that there is no such thing as how a bonobo acts, that they are individuals and they each have their own temperaments. Right here, I took a video of him, and then I played it back for Oshwe. And so he was entranced at this moment of getting to see himself, or at least see a bonobo on the screen. And the moment he saw it, he just got sucked further and further in. And it's interesting because he's seeing a representation of an animal, and I am with an animal that I'm trying to get inside. So it was like this weird loop that we were having. But actually, this is like one of the last videos that camera took because right after this picture, he started licking it, and it broke. This is Oshwe again. I brought a little good luck charm, a little stuffed animal, and I brought it out just to take a picture with Oshwe in the background. But the moment that Oshwe saw it, he got this look on his face of, I want. He's just so covetous. And a lot has been written about great ape intelligence, how smart they are, and that's one of the reasons that they're so important to science, but I was really struck by the emotional spectrum that you can see in the apes. It's impossible to know what a bonobo is thinking, but it's very easy to see that there's a wide spectrum of feeling behind them. So when I first entered the nursery where the orphans were, they were very excited to have someone new to play with. And so it quickly became a game of King of the Mountain. So I had bonobos on my chest, on my arms, wrapped around my legs. I had one on my head, as you can see. I am not the best bongo drum, but I will do. You have to have a very strong neck if you hang out with bonobos because they love to hang out right there. So I was really busy when I was in the enclosure. And what was interesting to see is how some of the orphans were very sociable and they would spend a lot of time playing with me, and then other ones just wanted to be next to their surrogate mothers and just to be close and safe. So it's the whole range of personalities you would see in people. While I had bonobos on my head, I felt a tug on my shoe, and I was pretty sure that one of the bonobos was untying my shoe and was going to run off with it, and I'd have just one sneaker for the rest of my time in Congo. But what was actually happening, I didn't realize until I played back the video of what was going on later.
Ça, c'est Kipolo.
Kipolo qui est en train de te faire.
Kipolo.
Attention.
Okay.
Toi.
Border.
Ouais. Je border.
Oh.
Toi, tu chasses les autres.
Et maintenant, ça...
Et l'autre est seulement pour
Just
toi.
moins intéressant.
Oh.
So obviously he wasn't, you can see what's happening there. He did cause the problem. He did untie my shoe, but Kipolo is trying to retie my shoe. He's trying to make the knot that he sees on the other shoe. You're actually seeing him in the moment of giving up. He didn't quite get there. And I wound up with a loose slip knot on my shoe. It was striking on one level because it was a really intelligent act. It's trying to, solve a puzzle of how to make this knot. But what was more interesting to me was actually that it was a creative act. It was almost like the artistic impulse of trying to make something that isn't necessarily useful, but he wants to make it in and of itself. And that was another moment that really just cracked open the human and animal divide for me. Tool use is one of the most common phrases you hear when you talk about primates, because when Jane Goodall went to study the chimpanzees in Tanzania in the 1960s, she was the first to find that an animal that wasn't a human could use tools. And for the longest time, that was thought to be what distinguished us from other animals, that we could manipulate the environment to a desired effect, and other animals were too basic to do that. But this is what she found happening. These are bonobos. She was studying chimpanzees, but the process was the same. They would use rocks to crack open nuts to get to the food inside. And what I find so fascinating about Jane Goodall, and that was so inspiring about the work that she did, was that she changed the model of how science worked. For the longest time, scientists would study great apes by bringing them from their native countries to Europe, to America, to laboratories to try to test their intelligence. They would sit an orangutan down with a stick and a ball and try to see what happened. And the orangutan was depressed and confused and would just sort of sit there. Jane Goodall changed it. She went to Tanzania and she said, I am not going to change the way that the chimps act. I am just going to observe. I'm going to try to see a chimp as a chimp and just take notes. So she didn't create the artificial environment. She just saw what was there. And it exploded everything we thought about what humans could do and what animals could do. She saw they were using tools. She saw incredibly complex social structures. And it seems so obvious to us now that, you should watch and see what's already there. But Western science, it goes a long way back for our methodologies and our attitude towards humans. Descartes in the 17th century, would dissect live dogs for an audience of his peers. And when the peers would get kind of squeamish when the dog was crying out in pain, Descartes would say, you're being sentimental. You need a soul in order to feel anguish and pain, and the dogs do not have a soul. So what you're seeing is a representation of pain that the dog is using to manipulate you and get you to behave, but it actually can't feel anything. Which seems a little silly to us now, but it has a long history in our Western cultures, going way back to, if you look at Genesis 1:28. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. This is God's command to Abraham. And giving humans dominion over the animal kingdom, that basically you are in a position of authority. You can be stewards or you can use the animals, but it is up to you to do what you like with them. And that really is how science worked until Jane Goodall went to look at the chimpanzees. Here's an orangutan picture from 1842, taken in London. And this is Jenny. She was one of the orangutans that were brought from Indonesia to Europe to be studied. But as you can see, she was dressed up in human clothing, and she was given a little tea set. And the idea was that let's see how close we can get her to being a person. There was very little interest in seeing the orangutan as an orangutan. We no longer obviously dress our zoo animals up in clothing, and we do try to study animals on their own terms. But this idea of that animals are interesting as far as they are people still has a big prominent place in our culture. Most of the children's picture books that we see now have animals as their main figures. But those animals are not really acting like the animals themselves. They are wearing human clothing, they are speaking English, they have human drives and desires. The three little pigs build homes, and they're wearing shirts there. And then, of course, this continues to the present day. The really interesting thing is that this is a vehicle of empathy. Kids really root for the three little pigs, and they want them to survive. They want them to escape the wolf. They want their houses to stay up. But then an hour or two later, many children will then be eating pig on the plate. But of course, something really interesting happens in our language, that pig no longer is pig once you're eating it. It becomes pork. So you no longer have to face the fact of the animal. You no longer have to see the animal while you're consuming it. It's renamed so that you have the comfort of avoiding the image that we have here of the pig. And this happens with every mammal that we eat. Cows become beef when we eat it. Deer, this is an exceptionally cute deer, sorry, becomes venison. Sheep becomes mutton. And what's interesting is that once we leave the group that we belong to, mammals, it becomes less important. We are comfortable eating a chicken and calling it a chicken. We're comfortable eating a duck and calling it a duck, and so on with all the fish. And it's a way of keeping animals out of view, that we have chickens around us every day. They're in the dining hall, but we don't necessarily think about the animal itself, and we certainly don't with the mammals. And for me, I eat meat. I'm not trying to, scold anyone, but I think it's incredibly hard, given the structures that we live in, to keep animals in view. There are 10 billion animals that are raised and killed every year in the United States for food, behind closed walls, and we only see it once it's a meat, and we stop seeing the animal itself. And it's a really surprising number when you think about it that way. So that leads us to the question of, why hadn't I ever seen a chicken crossing the road? Like, what is going on there? And I think when you think about our storybook interpretation of the animal, we have much empathy for it. We have the food that we don't really see as the animal, certainly not while we're eating it. And the chicken itself fades from view. It's really hard to find a chicken today in our community. In Indonesia, if you ask someone, why did the chicken cross the road, you'd probably get 4 or 5 different answers. There might have been tasty grubs on the other side. It might have been avoiding a village dog. It could have been a hen that was being chased by a rooster. And so you'd actually have a solution for it. But ultimately, when we ask the question here, now, among us, in our context, it is a thought experiment. The chicken did not cross the road because it can't. So it's been such a substantial work on my part to try to keep animals in view, and I think I'm failing every day at it, but I'm also trying, and I think it's something that we all can work towards, is trying to see what is so easily invisible. Thank you.